Speaking of women who love toxic men, we're going to talk about 1991's Cape Fear. And I pray to God it was 91 because I that
It
just said
was.
that.
It
Okay,
was
good.
91.
1991's Cape Fear, starring Robert De Niro, Nick Nolte, Jessica Lange, who, is the mother of horror right now, especially with American Horror Story. Our Juliette Lewis, rest in peace to her father who died, a few years ago. And if you don't know who he is, he was in Devil's Rejects. So if nobody knows who I'm talking about, look it up. I don't have time for this. Um, but so Cape Fear is so technically Cape Fear is a remake from the 60s film starring Gregory Peck and Robert, what's his name? Robert
Mitchum.
Mitchum. Robert Mitchum. And if you don't know who Gregory Peck is, then you need to watch To Kill a Mockingbird because I don't know how to help you anymore at this point. Like, I feel like at this point in our lives, I know that I'm a little bit older than most of our listeners, or if we're looking at Gen Z, I know that To Kill a Mockingbird is now banned in Florida. But if
Oh
you
my
really
God, I
want
didn't
to,
Oh,
know that.
it is. Yeah, we're not allowed to. I used to read it with my ninth graders, and we're no longer allowed to do that. So Lance made a lot of comments today, and I just want to address
Hmm.
those first.
He may
okay.
not
Some
do
of
cardio, but he runs that mouth.
he does. That's absolutely true. That's
This
I
isn't a
agree.
horror movie. There it is.
Okay.
It's out and about.
So
Go on.
those of you may be wondering why we chose this movie, but it is considered psychological horror. And if you do go to Google and write into Google, because that's how I find all the movies that happened that year. If you do horror
Mhm.
films released from 1993, Cape Fear is in there. So I
Interesting.
don't want to hear that it
It's a
is not a
thriller.
horror movie. First of all, I think that a lot of people, and this is, I'm just going off of what I think some of you may think. And I don't think a lot
Ooh.
of you are very, in this category,
Smart.
but
Oh,
I think some people, shut up. I think that, well, I think some people might not view it as a horror movie because Max Cady, played by Robert De Niro, he doesn't wear a mask. He's not your typical slasher, and he's not really a slasher. I mean, let's call a spade a spade. He's a serial rapist. He's an abuser. He's manipulative. He's psychologically manipulative, right? He's
mm,
very, I think,
perfect.
I know.
well,
All I'm thinking right now is like, oh, red flags. I can't imagine why she loves this movie.
he's a
Who
he's
kn-
a
who
he's a
knew?
little okay. So I just will say I would have been Ileana Douglas at the bar flirting with him. Yes, of course. Looking at all of these things through her eyes, this is definitely a horror film. I mean, first of all, let's look at the at face value. At the very beginning, the dog dies. Dog is poisoned and killed. Okay.
You didn't even see it happen. Like it's like
They
on the
explained
side
Okay,
note.
enough.
okay. No, no. First of all, this is why I get so defensive about this film because if you can't appreciate Jessica Lange's performance when she's discussing what happened to the dog, that was probably one of the first things I always remember about this movie is her crying and just her her turmoil and how she's winding down. Like she's talking about the dog that's winding down, but the fact that she's just in this dread that's coming out of her. Her performance in this film, I think, is probably on par with Robert De Niro's, in my opinion. And we can talk about that later if you want.
She's
But
good. No, she is. She really
Lance
is.
is
You're right.
Lance is like, she's good.
They're trying to reinvent things. They also ripped off or not ripped off, but like you know how in the gate where like they had the whole like computer skyline that
They're
happened a couple
ripping off the
times.
gate.
No, 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 no,
I
no,
don't
no,
think that Scorsese had the
no,
gate in
no.
mind.
You heard what I said initially. I said ripping off or that ideal, that same thing. I'm sure Scorsese didn't come up with this. Oh my god. See,
Okay.
this is what I'm saying right here.
Okay. No, no. No, I'm sorry. Martin Scorsese, friend of the podcast.
Oh my
I
god,
want
here
to
it is.
apologize first of all and foremost. Apparently, you're ripping off the gate now in your direction. So, a little bit of background before we get into that. Actually, Steven Spielberg does have a lot to do with this movie. So, if you do like Spielberg films, who did Jaws, we were just talking about Jaws earlier. So, if you don't know who that is, I can't help you, and you need to read a
Get a
book. I
life.
don't know. Um, Oh, and we also talked about Jurassic Park as well. But Steven Spielberg was actually initially set to direct this film. And for whatever reasons, there was a lot of back and forth with this. I wrote some in my notes, but I think that the biggest deterrent for him was that this film was very violent, even up to Spielberg standards, right? Because it's not only that is it violent, it's very mean too, I think. And so basically he got on board with Scorsese, and there was all this back and forth. Eventually Scorsese takes it because Scorsese initially had Schindler's List, and then basically they swapped movies. And I don't know all the logistics in that, but it was something that I was reading and I was like, it kind of makes sense. But Spielberg is still in the background. He's not credited really for this film, but he's still in the background with a lot of the things that happen in this movie.
Like Poltergeist.
Oh yeah, like Poltergeist, because Toby Hooper did Poltergeist, but Spielberg was still part of it. Would this movie been better with somebody else? I don't think so. I think Nick Nolte does a great job. And the thing is, he did lose a lot of weight for this role. And there was a lot of both Robert De Niro and Nick Nolte had to go through a lot of changes to play these characters because one, Robert De Niro is obviously a lot smaller than Nick Nolte, and Nick Nolte was heavier. So Nick Nolte lost a lot of weight to play Sam Bowden. And Robert De Niro had to bulk up and actually get some muscle and so he could wear those.
He was 48 when this movie came out. So for him
He
to
looked damn fine in this movie.
Yeah,
I
like-
mean, he still had all his hair. Good for him.
I think what is it? It's like Robert De Niro's probably looked his best physique wise.
Oh, he was 48. Oh, that's so cute, Lance.
48.
Lance is not 48.
Not
I am
yet.
not 48.
Seven.
Not yet. Not yet. But
Next time I see him, he will be 48.
yes, I will be.
The film is about a convicted rapist released from prison after serving a 14-year sentence, stalks the family of the lawyer who originally defended him. So we have Nick Nolte, who plays Sam Bowden, and he was the attorney for Max Cady, who is Robert De Niro. And basically, we learn in the film that Bowden, or Nick Nolte, kind of botched the trial because he knew that
He
De
was an actual
Niro was
rapist.
guilty. Yeah. And he didn't want him going free. So he buried a report that probably could have got him, either a lesser sentence or not convicted at all. And 14 years later, Max Cady's released and he is basically tormenting this family. So we learn how he gets all of his money and how he's doing or whatever, but like he's basically obsessed with trying to get, avenge the 14 years that he's lost.
That was one thing that I thought was very strange, and I think it connected now that you said what you said, because the whole thing is like Nick Nolte's character hid the fact that the victim was promiscuous, and I was like, so
Yeah, exactly.
like
In
what
today's
is
world, that doesn't mean shit.
yeah, and so I had trouble getting over that. And I was like, this whole movie is based on the fact that we didn't slut shame someone. So, but now, because I guess, so he knew he actually did it. Because my thing is, maybe I just missed it, or maybe it went over my head, but they never actually like confirmed for sure that Robert De Niro did do it. Because at first I was like, oh, maybe he didn't do it, but then like this evidence made them think he did it, which is why he makes more sense to get revenge because you got sent to prison for something you didn't do.
Yeah. Well, Nick
Maybe
Nolte,
it's just old values that.
Yeah, exactly.
Sam Bowden does mention throughout the movie that the reason he buried the report is because like De Niro's character, Katie, would brag to him about all of the things that he did. So it's more of like man to man. This is what I do to these women, and this is what I can do, and I just get away with it. It's blah blah blah, right? So he knew that he did it. He knew that. He's like a modern day vampire, if you will. Like you just like kind of you get like enthralled by him, and don't laugh at me, but you get enthralled by just his charm and his benevolence, or what you think is benevolence, and then until he strikes, and then it's too late at that point, right? Because look what
Sounds like
happened.
someone I know.
So one of the things I want to say that this is a horror movie. There are a lot of nods to Hitchcock, especially with the beginning sequences, how the colors are shot. Like the dream sequence is another nod to Hitchcock, and like Vertigo, and like all of these psychological horror. Not everything is like slasher
Thrillers.
and trauma and nonsense for you, okay?
Psychological.
And also for Christ's sake, he dresses up as a woman to kill somebody in the movie. I mean,
by the
if
way,
that's not Norman Bates, I don't know what is.
how did that scenario go? Like, he's like, yeah, da 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 da, and all you hear is, yeah, back, and he still sits down. I like, are you fucking kidding me? And you're waiting for somebody to come in there. I'd wait for you to turn around, show me your face before I would even turn my back towards you.
Well, they don't even realize, the thing is that they don't even realize that he's in the house. I think that the hardest part, I think, getting around this movie, and Nick Nolte, Bowden even mentions it at some point. He's like, I know he's getting into the house, I just don't know how, which is interesting. So some of the homages that they paid to the original is that Robert Mitchum, who plays Max Cady in the old Cape Fear from the 60s, he's actually the cop in
Detective.
the detective in this one.
Yep.
Gregory Peck comes back. He's a lawyer in this film. He's actually defending Max Cady. It's his only scene. It's actually his last appearance in any film.
Oh.
So
Yeah.
Gregory Peck is also in this. And then we have Martin Balsam, who also shows up in the film.
The
and
judge,
he plays
right?
one of the judges. Yeah. And so it's just interesting. I like that they peppered in those people.
That was really cool.
It is
Yeah.
really cool that they still had them, and they're playing active roles in this movie. They're not just simple cameos, like especially Robert Mitchum's character. And what does he say where he was like,
Oh, he actually, I thought he actually stole a line from the original movie where he
yeah,
was like,
when he
he's like,
says,
sorry for
yeah, what
your
did he
personal
say? Oh my
I
God.
think
But
I think it's originally one of his lines from the original
mhm,
one when he's actually playing
he's
De
playing
Niro's
Katie.
character. Yeah.
Yeah.
Your
And
sensibilities. Yeah, that was it. Your sensibilities.
Robert De Niro and Ileana Douglas's, scene. So we'll talk about that scene. I think it's probably one of the most visceral and horrific scenes in the film. All of their scenes together were improvised. And I guess when he slaps the handcuffs on her at some point, she's supposed to start getting scared. But Ileana Douglas suggests that, well, maybe we'll make it seem like she's playing along, like they're having a good time, because they were having fun and they were talking about these things and they were talking about getting a little kinky, right? They were being a little dirty at the bar. They're having a good time. They're flirting, as you do. You don't
Mhm.
expect to be your face bitten off. And that's the thing. It was very Silence of the Lambs at that moment. And for you to say that that's not a horror, but the thing is, Silence of the Lambs had the same shit going on at the time too, because they were trying to put these films under the guise that they are not horror, so that they would be more highly revered. But
And Lance fell
obviously,
for it.
Lance fell for the whole
Did
thing.
I?
Exactly. Yeah.
Did I? Did I? I
I know.
don't think I did.
Mhm.
I mean, that's what I'm saying. It's like you have a moment, but it's like it's a horror moment, but at the same time, is he does actually rape her. You know what I mean? And she's so scared
But that's
of the
not
other.
scary.
It's more realistic than not. Like when I watch a horror movie, I want something that doesn't seem like it makes sense. You know what I mean? Like it's like, for example, is that's not the main objective there. It's to beat her. I mean, if he beat her up and only beat her up and didn't rape her, I would have been okay. He's making a point. Or if he put her on his lawn or put her in the bed or something like that, that would make sense because then it's like you're trying to do something extra. This is just him kind of going, hey, I'm gonna get into your life type stuff. This is like thriller shit to me, and that's what I'm saying. It's like there's a difference to me personally. Is there's thriller and then there's a horror movie. A horror movie is someone who comes in there like Scream, where they're being sneaky. You don't see anything. They are
He
plotting
is
against
being
you.
sneaky. He is
You
being
see all the
sneaky,
stuff.
though.
That's what I'm saying.
You
It's just
see, but okay, so you want it to be more of a mystery. I mean, obviously they don't show him raping her, but it's the fact that he bit her cheek off. He targeted her
it's a
one
great
because he
scene.
knew.
I'm
He
not saying it's not a great
knew.
scene.
And
It's just
how
I don't see this as being a horror movie though. It's just like the closest thing you got to a horror movie is when he actually takes the piano wire still from the key, because when he's like, "What happened to the key? Somebody took the wire," and then he
yeah.
literally uses that wire and murders him with it. That's
My
about the
dumbass just
closest
put
thing.
that together.
Mikey's face as I'm saying it, he goes,
Like, oh, that's
Well,
what
if you
happened
didn't
to
"Oh."
catch
it.
it before, ladies and gentlemen, Sam keeps trying to play the piano and he's bitching that there's a piano wire missing. And
My bad.
the dog gets poisoned, the piano wire's missing, like we're not putting two and two together. And the private
That's so great.
investigator staying at the house ends up getting strangled with it, which I think is another awful and horrific scene, which apparently is not horror to some
No, no,
people.
no. I'd say that's probably the most horror scene in the whole movie.
I will say when the cop sat down at the kitchen table and he was dressed as the housekeeper,
Yeah.
I didn't know that that was him. And when he turned
You
around and
don't.
like strangled him, I thought it was funny for like a second, but then the second afterwards, I was like, oh, that's actually kind of creepy.
That again, the most horror part of the whole movie is that part only.
I don't know. I thought biting your cheek off was pretty horrific, also.
Well, I mean, again, but that then I'm looking at like okay, that's cool, but like you're talking about two scenes out of a 2-hour movie.
Is Seven a horror film?
Oh,
I've never
Seven,
seen it. I've never seen it.
it's
I don't know.
considered, but it's
Yeah.
also a psychological horror. So
different though.
it is not different
Oh.
because some people would argue that Seven is not a horror film.
What?
Actually,
Really?
is
What?
Silence of the Lambs a horror film?
Silence of the
What?
Lambs is a horror film.
Who were you
But-
about to silence?
No,
You
no,
went
no,
like this
no,
to
no.
somebody, and I know it
Okay.
wasn't me.
No, I was gonna talk about the scene in Seven, but you haven't seen it, so I was like, but
I've
there's
heard about most of it, but
right. Okay, well, if we're going that same route, then what about Saw?
what about? I've never seen it.
You've seen Saw, don't you lie? Don't you lie? Don't you
Okay.
lie to get away from the point? Because you both now, if you're watching the video here, literally I said that and they both went like this. Their smirkish smiles went up, and I was like, "What about Saw?" Because Saw is literally the same thing.
Yeah, and Saw's a
The
horror
same,
movie.
well,
And it
Saw
is a
and
horror movie,
Seven are
but
the,
it's
are the
different.
s-
Could you compare Saw compared to this and say they're the same movie?
There's
No, but
connective
that's not the-
tissue.
That's
We go
not
to
the-
Saw to Seven, to Silence of the Lambs to Cape Fear.
How
Is
did
that what we're doing?
How?
Is that what we're doing now?
You cannot compare torture porn to a psychological horror film. They're completely different things. Most people would argue that Vertigo is not a horror film. Most people would argue that The Omen is not a horror film. So
But this goes along with
if you're
time
going
frame.
with the same premise, it's not about the time frame. It's the fact
It's
that
totally
you
about the time
just
frame.
you just wanted
Totally about
a
the time frame.
trauma bullshit movie.
What?
And you didn't get it. So now
Oh my
I saw
God.
it because I saw your fucking list you sent to us earlier, and I see what you're doing, and I'm not appreciative of it.
Oh,
So
it's
you
my
have
pick.
fun of whatever. Yeah, it's your pick. You
Oh
go ahead
yeah,
and make your pick because you're talking all this shit today. Wait till it's your turn. Thank you.
you're gonna love it. That's the sad part is I know you're gonna like it because I've seen this movie before, and you're gonna be like this, going, "Okay, maybe."
Which one? Because you sent me two,
I can't say it right now. Well, we're
and
on.
they both looked terrible. So whatever. Everybody listening to this episode today, don't forget to hit the poll and then let us know your thoughts and prayers in any of the comments that we post, because I think it's really important that I hear everybody's opinion and not just
here it is.
and not
She's supposed
just
to be right,
one.
folks.
I'm not.
She's supposed
I'm
to
not
be
trying
right.
to be right.
Well,
I'm
just wait until you figure out what the loser has to do. That's all
Well,
I'm saying.
if you want to follow us, feel free to do so on Instagram at SlashersPod or Mutant Goons from Beyond. And if you want to complain directly and tell one of us how wrong we are, Lance,
Lance.
today,
Zombie versus hate.
Um,
Zombie versus hate.
yes, you can find us individually at Zombie versus Hate for Lance, at Horror and a Half Shell for Mikey, Doug Bizarro for Doug, and you can find me at Pathologically Aid or ADE. So if we don't have anything else to say today, thank God we don't. It's a long episode.
I'm sure Lance could go on.
I'm sure he could, but we're not going to let him.
No.
So with that, I'm just going to say it was a good start to this July. Goodbye and good day.
Goodbye. Don't die.
Don't die or die.
Bye.
Good morning. That's Slashy, the manatee mascot.
Yes.
Fuck you.
It's gonna be Norwal.